Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to Creation Conversations. Excuse me. Do not adjust your devices. I am not Joe. I know I've lived my life. I'm not Joe, but I'm filling in for Joe because he's away at a wedding today. Yay, lovely, joyous celebrations. With me today, we've got Dr. Diane Eager and, of course, our International Director, John Mackay. How are you doing, guys?
Well, thank you. Good.
Good.
And down under, we are both well, and it's been raining, praise the Lord.
Yes, hallelujah. Answer to prayer for Jurassic Ark there.
Yes.
What have you been up to, John? I hear you've been a bit busy.
Yes, we've been very busy. We've done lots of digging at Jurassic Ark in the past 2 weeks, lots of exciting finds. And only last week we had to bring people in with truckloads of water for our more sensitive plants because the ground was getting so dry. And just over the past night, we've had 25 mils or 1 inch on the old scale of rain. So thank you to all of you who prayed, because God is the climate changer, not Bill Gates or anybody else.
Exactly. Well, the God is in charge, and that's all that matters, not weathermen, as we are so often probably indoctrinated to believe sometimes. But yes, welcome to the show, everyone. Glad to see you all. Hello, everyone in the chat. Nice to see you. Remember, share the stream, like it, subscribe if you haven't already. Get the show out there. We want as many people as possible to see it. And hello, if you're listening on the podcast, we want to wish you a very special hello. Thank you for tuning into our little show. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start up. As I just mentioned, we are available on podcasts. It's a new thing. We launched it last week, and it's been a big hit. We've had lots of great feedback. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and also on Spotify, and many, many more. We can't list them all on the slide because there's just no room. But you can search Creation Conversations in your favorite podcasting app, and the search engine will do the rest. Remember to look for the Creation Conversations logo, and you'll be able to find all the lovely content that we're putting out for free with no annoying ads. Isn't that nice? Right. So, what a brilliant show for you today. We're talking about, where do bad things come from? Where does it go wrong? We've got a little bit of a warning here. Apparently, according to my notes here, we've got a little bit of a warning. For those of you who are a bit iffy around snakes, this will include some very up-close imagery of snakes. Do be warned, this is your fair warning. Podcast listeners, you've nothing to worry about because it's all on audio. Diane, are you ready for your slideshow?
Yes, we can do that. We just need to share the screen. So I go to my slideshow here and start it. And you have to bear with us non-technical people. Okay.
Sometimes technology works against us here at Creation Conversations.
Right.
We'll get there in the end.
All right. Is that on the screen now?
I'll just put that on the screen for you now. There we go.
Oh, that's good. Yes, well, any of you who have read Genesis 1, when you get to the end of the chapter there, it says, "And God saw all that he'd made, and behold, it was very good." But as you know from your own experience, the world is not very good. So obviously something bad has happened, and people do wonder, well, why do things seem to be so well designed for a bad world if God made everything very good? So I'm just going to share a couple of examples. Now, the first one is not snakes. It's actually frogs. Now, people like frogs. They're really cute. And here are some lovely looking frogs. Aren't they lovely? I mean, look at that one. And that one, even he's a bit more subtle, but even so, he's got an interesting pattern there. But these little frogs might look very pretty, but they're actually deadly poisonous, right? These are poison dart frogs. You might have heard of these. They don't live in Australia. They live in South America, although they've been exported all around the world, and they are kept in zoos because people like them because they're so pretty. But there's a very interesting thing about poison frogs. They don't actually make their own poison. It's derived from their diet. They eat millipedes and ants and small invertebrates. And as part of their digestive and processing, their chemical biochemistry, they break these down and the waste products are actually exported to their skin, because frog skin has glands in it and it can be used to excrete substances that they don't want. Now think about that, because I have a couple of questions. Would poison dart frogs be poisonous in the very good world? Right? And in fact, the answer to that is no, and I'll explain why in a moment. Okay, question 2. What would want to eat poison frogs in the very good world? And that's an important question, because the standard evolutionary story about these is that they developed these bright colours as a warning system to animals that might want to eat them by saying, you go away, I'm poisonous, so don't eat me. And particularly that red one, it's meant to be a sort of red flag that these are poisonous. But in fact, in the very good world, nothing would want to eat them. Now, why can we say that? All right, if we go back to Genesis, we're very clearly told, to every beast of the earth and to every bird of the heaven and to everything that creeps on the earth. So frogs are somewhere in there. They're land-dwelling animals. They creep on the earth. Everything that has the breath of life, they're air-breathing. I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. So in the good world, frogs didn't eat millipedes or ants or other creepy crawlies, and other animals didn't eat frogs. So that wouldn't have been a problem. The world would have been very good. But there are some animals that do seem to be designed so well for killing. So I'm sorry about if you don't look like snakes. I've got a couple of pictures of snakes coming up. So listen rather than look, all right? Now, snakes have sharp teeth to bite. They have venom to poison things. And some snakes even have heat sensors. And the standard story for those is that they were designed to find warm-blooded prey, because some of these snakes eat sort of mice and small mammals, which are warm-blooded, or small birds. So let's have a look at that. Now, up at Jurassic Ark in Australia, we have these creatures. This is a red-bellied black snake. I did actually see one up there when I was there a few years ago. It was dead. There's no way I would have gone near it if it had been alive. But they are there, and we do have to warn people about them, as well as other things like spiders and other things. Now, let's think about how snakes eat their food. They don't chew their food. So having sharp teeth is quite useful for piercing their food, whatever it is. Right? And the interesting thing about venom is that even the evolutionists will admit that it is related. The venom, the chemicals in venom are related to the chemicals in digestive systems, right? Digestive enzymes and various other chemicals that aid that. So the venom actually starts chemical digestion. So if you think about this, this is quite good design, irrespective of what the snake is going to eat. They have sharp teeth. They will pierce the food, inject the venom, right, and then swallow it whole. And the digestive process has started from inside as well as starting from outside when the food gets into their stomach. So that seems like a good piece of design. It's not necessarily designed to kill things, even though it does in this world today. Right. Now, what about the heat sensing device? Okay, it's called a pit, and the snakes that have this are called pit vipers. And it is useful for sensing warm-blooded prey, but was that always its function? What was it designed for? Now, in the recent literature, there's been some interesting studies on this, and it's a good example of how evolution is not a good worldview for understanding what we see in the world today, but creation is. And I just want to encourage students who are going in to study biology. Having a biblical view of the worldview will actually help you understand biology. It won't hinder you. So here's an example. All right. Now here is one of these pit vipers, and the heat sensing pit looks like a little nostril. It's not a nostril. It's actually a little indentation, and there are heat sensitive, infrared sensitive nerves at the base of that. Now, a couple of years ago, this article was published in the Journal of Experimental Biology, which is a fairly high-profile, prestigious journal. And I don't know why, if you can see the title of that, I deliberately used this screenshot just to show you that I'm not making it up. But here is the title, a little bit easier to read. Cooler snakes respond more strongly to infrared stimuli, but we have no idea why. Now, I've got to really admire the honesty of these scientists. They have done a series of experiments and they can't explain their results. And they were honest enough to say that right up front, even in their title. Okay. So what they did is, or what their thinking was, all right, snakes are cold-blooded. Now, technically, that doesn't mean they sort of refrigerator cold all the time. They do actually get quite warm, but they get their heat from outside. Technical term is ectothermic, right, from outside. They are less active when their body temperature falls. They get quite sluggish. When they are, when their body temperature rises, they are more active. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, this is what they found in the experiments they did that that article is based on. Now, they did it with rattlesnakes. Now, fearsomely venomous, poisonous snakes. And they said, remarkably, rattlesnakes sensing warm moving targets with their facial pits, that's those little pits that we looked at in the picture a few slides away, are less responsive as body temperature increases. Okay. So these scientists were genuinely confused. We review various physiological mechanisms, in other words, body function mechanisms related to body temperature in the proposed literature, but none can satisfactorily explain the results. In other words, we found this odd thing, but we can't explain it. But they were honest enough to publish their results. All right. The interesting thing is they could have found the answer to their question in the very journal that they published these results if they had gone back to 2004. I don't know whether they did that. I'm not criticizing them for that. But anyway, this is another article in the same journal, and it's called Heat in Evolution's Kitchen. Now, notice the evolutionary mindset here. Evolutionary perspectives on the function and origin of the facial pits of pit vipers, okay, and that's their scientific name. In other words, this was studying these pits to see, can we explain where they came from and what they originally came into being for. Now, they just assume that if it exists, it must have evolved. So they have to throw that word at everything. And the news service that comes out from the journal named Science wrote a lovely little summary of this that I couldn't say better myself, and we published this in our fact file where we archive a lot of our science news. All right. Biologists have long thought that pit vipers use the heat-sensing pits in their faces to track warm-blooded prey. But in a paper in the 15th of November, the Journal of Experimental Biology, they found that pits also help the snake gauge the temperature of their surroundings. Knowing when to slither underground to beat the heat is a key survival skill for cold-blooded creatures. And the researchers say that thermoregulation, in other words, temperature regulation, not hunting, may be why the pits evolved. Now, again, they've got the evolutionary mindset. If it exists, it must have evolved. So let's give a few clues to our clueless scientists. The pits were actually designed for thermoregulation in the very good world, in other words, for temperature regulation, because that is a useful function. And in the very good world, snakes would have used the outside temperature to regulate their own temperature. When they got too warm, they would need to go and find some shade or go underground. When they were cold, they would seek out some heat. Now, that is still a useful function, and the snakes do use it in this fallen world that we live in, the world that's no longer good, right? Now, as it happens, it's also useful for finding prey, but that is something that came later. So I would encourage you to have a biblical mindset or a creation mindset when you look at biology. You will see created design, you see brilliant design. So think about creation first, but things didn't stay that way. They went downhill. So don't think evolution, right, upwards, increasing complexity. Think of creation followed by degeneration. Or as we like to say at Creation Research, the world has gone from good to bad to worse. And we see that in the world that we study around us. So don't be afraid to take up science and study the world around you with a biblical worldview. In fact, it will explain things that the evolutionary scientists can't. And it will also help you to understand the nature of our God and Father who created us and who is also our judge and our Savior. And so I'll finish there. If we can go back to the main screen. Thanks, Sam.
There we go.
Yes.
That was fascinating. That was brilliant. Love that. I love a nice...
Diane, can I ask a question here?
Yes, please do.
Someone who's grown up with snakes, who has red-bellied black snakes in his own yard, because I'm living on the edge of the countryside, and tiger snakes and things like that. I've never been bitten once, right? My mum brought me up to not go to this part because the snakes were there at lunchtime, right? Now, of all the snakes you've mentioned or come across and that have venom and can bite you and even kill you, do any of them eat humans?
No, they don't.
So they're not.
Well, in fact, they physically can't because they have to swallow their food whole.
Even with that jaw stuff, they can't. So the poisonous ones, that's my experience too, because the only ones I've come across that can eat people are the non-toxic ones, like the big pythons. And usually they're a mile, right, rather than gobbled at you. So none of these are food-seeking mechanisms, even in the evolutionist context of biting people. Correct?
That's right, yes.
All right. So the other thing, because I've heard you give this lecture a few times, much longer than the 5 or 10 minutes we just had. What actually is in the venom that makes it so nasty to people if you get it in you? Because it really does hurt.
Oh, yes, because it's actually breaking down. The chemicals in it are actually destroying your tissues, which is what digestive enzymes do. They have to break down whatever an organism eats. So they have to break down proteins, the things that we're made of, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids and things like that. So they are literally, just destroying your tissue. So that's why it hurts, because it's chemical damage. It's like a really bad burn, but it's a chemical burn.
A chemical burn. You're in England, right, today?
Yes,
are you worried about snakes attacking you over there?
No. Well, I mean, depends where you go. I mean, I think I'm right in saying is the only sort of venomous one we have is the blackadder. But that tends to sort of scurry away from you before you even get close to having a bite. And that he would only really bite you if it was cornered, I think. But
how big is it?
Not very big. It's about an average blackadder is sort of, well, you can't see because I'm out of the camera frame, but it's sort of, I'd say probably about 1.5 arms length at most.
Well, before I went to England, I thought Blackadder was just a television show. But I went to England. I was up in Scotland and leading a field trip, and I yelled out, "A worm!" There was a worm on the beach because it was about that long. And someone said, "No, that's a snake." Have you got any thoughts, Sam, as to why there are so few snakes in England, or why the ones that are there are basically small compared to our Aussie snakes?
I would probably hazard a guess that because Britain is probably, obviously Australia is very much a warmer country than the UK. So I'd probably say that snakes are more well suited for slightly warmer climates than we are, so they don't have the ideal climate for growth. I'd probably reckon, in my opinion. Yeah, that's probably what I'd say. Is just the climate I don't think is quite right for the snake to grow.
Diane, would you agree with that?
Yes. In fact, reptiles grow all their lives, provided they are well-fed, disease-free, and not stressed, and they're living in a warm environment all year round, because they do need their body temperature to be high enough to be able to digest things. In cold weather, they just go torpid and they don't eat. In fact, it's not good for them to eat, because they're when their body temperature is low, they can't digest food. That happens with crocodiles and other reptiles as well. So that if you don't eat for 6 months of the year, you're not going to grow. And that applies to a lot of reptiles.
And you've been to Jurassic Ark. Well, I do the introduction, and it's true that I warn them that we have snakes, be careful. We have scorpions, be careful. We have funnel web spiders, be careful. We haven't had a single bite yet, right? I just have to do that because of the law, right? Otherwise, if someone gets bitten, I get blamed, and away it goes. That's the way the law is at the moment. But I've grown up with red-bellied black snakes. So for all of those of you who are thinking of coming to Australia after all the travel resumes again, don't worry too much about the red-bellied black snakes, because in my yard, I've had them run through my legs, right? They would rather not bite you. I'm not surprised at that, because we still have a remnant dominion, even though it's only a fraction of what we had. The snakes will run away from you 8 times out of 10, and usually only attack you if you stand on them. Hence my mother's warning, don't go over there, son. That's where the snakes are in the middle of the day, and they're sleeping and getting warm. And there's nothing worse than someone standing on you when you're fast asleep and you wake up grumpy. Snakes seem to be in exactly the same way. Diane, the frogs that you talked about, you made a good point there about them being poisonous only because of what they eat. Now, they eat ants and millipedes. What's poisonous about ants and millipedes?
Well, ants actually have formic acid in them. The poison is actually the breakdown products of digestion. So there's a bit of chemical processing there, and then because as part of our process of getting rid of rubbish, as it were, we chemically change it so that it's easier to get rid of, and so it's a breakdown product of what they're eating.
Okay, so are there any other creatures that are poisonous because of what they eat, not because of what they are?
Well, there probably are, actually. Even some snakes will sort of recycle poison from the things that they eat into glands in their necks. Cane toads will do that because that's
one of our biggest problems here in Australia, isn't it? Keeping a dog from eating a cane toad, because then it goes frothy everywhere, and the dog's dead shortly. But it's not the frog. It's actually the skin.
Yes, we have to remember frog skin is quite different to the skin of a mammal or a reptile. It's got lots of glands in it, and the frog actually uses that as an excretory organ, so that these waste products are poisonous, but then they weren't designed to be eaten in the first place anyway. The interesting thing about that is, because these frogs are so pretty, they've been exported around the world and people do keep them in zoos. if they feed them things that aren't toxic, like fly larvae and sort of mixtures of algae and various other derived matter like that, artificial food, they're not poisonous.
Right. So
They don't feed them millipedes and ants and things in zoos.
It reminds me too of
they feed them grubs and fly larvae and things like
that.
Some
of the things we eat behave in the same way. So you may notice that people who eat a lot of kimchi or things like that have a certain flavor when they walk into the room. And in fact, cannibals report, not name any race in particular, cannibals report that this race tastes different than that race, right? And it's got a lot to do with the diet that they ate. Out here in Australia, it's reported that Europeans don't taste anywhere near as good as other races, but that's regarded as politically incorrect these days. Sam, have you seen pink flamingos in your zoos over there?
Yes, I think so. I think we've seen flamingos because I know about flamingos because their colour is entirely based on their diet, because they eat shrimp and things like that have a pigment in them. So they feed the flamingos the same diet because everyone wants to see a pink flamingo. They don't want to see a brown flamingo or an orange flamingo or whatever.
Yes, well, they're grey if they don't eat that diet, which is pretty boring, really.
So both colour and taste and poisonous are consequences, particularly the poison one, of what the creature eats. And in a good world where they only ate the good created plants, there would have been none of that toxin. And you wouldn't have worried what they tasted like because you didn't eat them. That's really the point you're making, Diane.
Yes.
Okay, now, do we have questions about this on our website?
We do indeed. I can bring up the... here we go. This is the creation fact file. You can find all kinds of useful information there. We also have our question and answer section, well, website, an entire website dedicated to questions and answers. There we go. That's creation Q&A site. That's askjohnmackay.com. The other one was creationfactfile.com. All free for you to visit. Have a look. We've got some great info on there. Will help really get yourself into the topic and sink your teeth, if you'll pardon the pun, into some good topics on there. And
Sam, you can just put up the main website, because if they can't remember those, the shortcuts, just go to creationresearch.net, click Q&A, or click search anything.
Yes.
You'll be able to find any of those questions. Snakes, frogs, all of those things are listed. And quite a few years ago, Diane particularly and myself prepared that DVD, particularly for one man, an Englishman by the name of Sir David. You got his last name there, Sam? Sir David.
Attenborough?
That's him. That's right. Lots of pretty pictures and not much common sense. I don't mean to be critical. He's a brilliant presenter. His programs are beautifully done, but he doesn't give you any evidence at all to support his evolutionary nonsense. And he basically had one comment that this DVD deals with, and he said, "You creationists, you only ever talk about God making pretty orchids. If you really want to talk about explaining the world, what about that little boy living on the banks of a river in Africa where the sleeping sickness bug is, where the eye blindness worm is?" And away he went. Now, we did this particularly for him, right? So you'll find the DVD or the streaming app, or whatever you call these things today, streaming version of it, Did a Good God Makes Bugs, covers at length much of what we're doing today. So there's where you can get it from. DVDs, MP4s are streaming all around the globe. Did a Good God Make Bad Bugs? And this was actually handed to Sir David, right? We've corresponded to Sir David. We know very well that he won't debate, because he's told our professor friends, "Would you debate John Mackay?" he was asked. And he said no, because he'd lose. All right, so there's a challenge for you, Sir David. You're still alive. That's not much longer. But how about a debate on this subject to prove that you don't know what you're talking about? You'll enjoy this DVD. And perhaps if I take over with the next section, Sam, let's head you back to Jurassic Ark. Okay, one question first. Remember I said I give people a warning? I don't tell them that don't worry about the red-bellied black snakes, because the lawyers would play havoc with that if someone actually got bitten. I tell them that privately later on somewhere. But there's one animal in Australia, perhaps an insect we should call it, no, perhaps an arachnid to be more technically correct. You know, the spiders? Now, my wife hates spiders because when she was younger, one big tarantula fell off the roof onto her face while she was sleeping. She wasn't asleep much longer. But tarantulas don't bite you at all, at least not with any toxin. But we have one spider that actually is responsible for way more injuries, particularly to foreign tourists. This creature lives in the ground or lives in little nests. It's the funnel web spider, and our foreign tourists are the ones who suffer most, because they'll have a picnic and they don't take notice of the Aussies when we tell you don't sit on the ground unless you put a blanket down, because the most bites you get from this critter are on people's rear end or on their legs. This is our funnel web. Now, the funny thing is, the funnel web toxin is not for eating people. I mean, come on, the spider's this big. There's no way in the world it's going to drag an American tourist down its funnel and actually eat it. Trapdoor spiders do the same, but you'll find that the funnel web's toxin, if I remember correctly, it's only an allergen or a problem for unborn baby mice and for people and a few birds. It can't catch birds, it can bite American tourists, it can't eat them, and it can't even get at unborn baby mice. So there you see another evolutionist dilemma. Here we have a product which they talk about evolving for the animal to survive with, and it has not enabled it to do that at all. So you need to do as Diane did and think carefully. In the beginning, God made a good world. What would this thing do in a world that was very good? Simple analogy before I start flicking up some PowerPoints, and then we'll go back to questions and answers. Okay, Henry Ford is famous for what invention? No, he did not invent the car. That was invented long before he did. What he did was that American thing, invent a way to make more money faster. You know, the production line? Bless his heart, that's what he did. Instead of families making cars like they used to, single tradesmen making the whole car, you put the tires on, you make the seats, you paint the car. He had whole teams, and they ended up producing hundreds of cars a day. The price of cars dropped incredibly. So did the number of children. Well, it didn't drop, it did the opposite. It changed. The number of children killed by motor cars, the number of people in accidents skyrocketed. Question, did Henry Ford create the car to kill children? No, he didn't. He created it. You catch the word I used, created? The car did not happen by itself. Henry Ford was responsible. Did he create it to kill children? No, we know very well. He made it for carrying goods and for carrying people, getting you from A to B, and it did that brilliantly. There's no way in the world you can mount a lawsuit against the makers of cars to make them responsible for killing children, adults, increasing accidents, etc. What you find is the accident is because the kid didn't look to the left and look to the right before it crossed over, because the driver is drunk, because the mechanic forgot to put the wheel back on at the last service. It is not the fault of the creator of the car. Now keep that in mind. In the beginning, God created everything very good. And if you're looking for a reason for a toxin, yes, in the world, if that which is meant to digest something gets into your system, then it will do a good job. It does a great job at digesting. It's just not meant to be in you. And in the beginning, it wouldn't have been. So you're looking for something with a good purpose in a bad place, a good reason in the wrong area. Okay, now I'm going to switch my screen on here. Hopefully it will do it faster than Diane's did. I think we've got that right. Share, how's that, Sam? Are we coming up there? Yes, we are. Okay. Now, this is our report I gave in England. Can you see that? Yes? Okay, good. Diane and I again prepared it. We were asked by a Seventh-day Adventist conference to talk about diet and disease and all those things. So the whole video we'll promote a little bit later. But the Good World had an interesting comment. In Genesis 1:29 and 30, it is emphatic that God created the world good and he gave all the humans and the animals plants and fruits for their vegetables, for their food, for their total diet. There was no death, there was no destruction. Okay, now you may think a tomato or an apple is alive, but God has a different perspective. And that's one reason why naturally you pick up an apple and you bite it, or you pick up a dog and you bite it. Oh, you see, one's a vegetarian, one's a meat eater. If you bite the dog, it goes, yeah! And if it's dead, you can even say, the poor thing, I cooked a hot dog. You pick up an apple and bite it, you never say, oh, the poor apple, I killed it. In fact, naturally, you don't even react that way, because eating vegetables is not something that's bad anyway. Okay, one step further. Here's a good question for you. In a good world, could you have caught mad cow disease or bird flu? I was in Canada one year when they had both. Now, my favorite foods are steak and Chinese. Now, for the 6 weeks I was there, I wasn't allowed to eat them. Could you have caught them in a good world? No way. In a good world, I would not have been eating sensible cows or mad cows. I wouldn't have even gone to KFC for chicken. I would have been eating very healthy pumpkins and potatoes. You see, Genesis 1:26, God blessed them and said, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish, the fowl, every living thing that moves upon the earth. Now, I don't know about you, but I've grown up with animals, and the one thing I've discovered is they actually do know about our supposed dominion. Some people still have a lot of dominion, like animal trainers, lion trainers. Now, you wouldn't want a job like that, but most animals actually respect a human being who takes authority over them. Animals bite, usually because they sense fear in you. Even bees are like that. I kept bees once, and I made one mistake. I forgot to do my veil up. I'm smoking them out because that calms them down. But then the guard bees came out the front. They saw something, and then 2 of them hit my neck. Then 47 of them hit my neck. I counted the stings afterwards, and at that point I ran and ran. It was just like in Donald Duck, pursued by a herd, a flock, whatever you want to call a bees. Swarm, that's the right word I'm trying to pick up at this time of the morning in Australia. And I dived into the water, and they finally gave up. Fortunately, I had a big pile of water there to dive into. They attacked my hat instead. I feared. Many people can stand there, one bee sting and they're dead. It's not the bee's toxin which is a problem. All I ended up with was a sore neck. It's the immune system sometimes. Man's ability to dominate has disappeared largely because of sin, and the creature's ability to sting you has got elevated because of the problem of sin, and also human immunity is another factor. Do you realize some kids in Australia have been bitten by snakes and it has no effect on them at all? Their immune system is way better than others. Every Christmas time, we see this. Here's a question. These creatures, mosquitoes, snakes, flies, ticks, T-Rex, in a good world, what would these good creatures have eaten? Do you realize that T-Rex would have not eaten what you think? He would have not done the Jurassic Park thing. He would have done the Jurassic Ark thing. So come and visit us up there. In a good world, could insects have spread malaria, mosquito, Ross River virus? You mightn't know that one. That's a mosquito bug one. Yellow fever, river blindness, the one that David Attenborough so boasts that he's an atheist because of that. He's an atheist because he's angry at God. Oh, he knows God exists. He just wishes he was him. Atheists all want to be God. So he uses an excuse that's a lie. Do you realize all of these creatures, even these insects, what are they looking for? Food. I mean, the mosquito wants to bite you. Only the woman, the female, sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned woman. That's real sexist. Only the female mosquito puts the bite on you because she's after protein to help her lay eggs. And in every case, in a good world, these creatures would have got the protein they're after from vegetation, but not now. You might want to ask how the world changed so mosquitoes have only got a choice sometimes to eat you or your dog. Good question. In the real world, in the good world, David Attenborough needs to put God into the picture and God's world, because river blindness would not have even been possible. Mad cow disease wouldn't have been possible. You see, there's the starting point. The point that Diane made and I made, and what's in the video we did for the SDA conference in the UK about disease. I think they were very brave inviting creation research to do that. We mentioned a few home truths about things that some of them would not have liked. Everything God created was very good. Let me prove it to you. You see my pictures of orchids? I've done programs on orchids, and you know that they're beautifully designed. They're even edible. I've eaten some on television. Okay, there's one of our orchids in Australia. I know it doesn't look much like an orchid. It's not even as big as your thumbnail, so most people never see it. My daughter and I were out for an hour and a half photographing this as the sun rose. Look at it. It's called a greenhood orchid. Some red versions of it will show up the tiny red. Can you see the little tongue right in the middle? When the wind blows, this wags. So sometimes this is called the politician's orchid. Its tongue never stops. Fascinating. But it's pollinated by insects. Do you see the little insect on the right-hand side? That's the head of a little mosquito. I know, I told you these were tiny. Do you realize mosquitoes pollinate orchids and they feed on orchids? The male mosquito, you'll be interested in knowing, only ever feeds on plants, on plant sap, on plant, on the orchid nectar. You know his long proboscis thing that you think, oh, God designed it to prick me. No, he designed it to prick into plant veins and to prick into orchid sort of nectaries. And it does a good job. And your skin is usually softer than that. Well, there he is. Yep, tiny plant. And you know what's interesting? When he gets up and he touches that tongue, the tongue picks him up and throws him into the back of the orchid. Yeah, very sensitive. Obviously designed, because look what happens next. I've cut the orchid in half so you can see what's down the bottom. There is the little tongue. Now it's right back against the back of the orchid, and the nectary is right in the bottom. The insect, he actually doesn't mind this. He's now trapped in the flower. He can't push that tongue out of the road. He's not strong enough. But he doesn't mind. He's having one for the road, one for Aunt Sally, one for Uncle Bill. He's getting a free fuel stop. But in exchange, he pays a price. There's only one way out. The door is locked. The front door, he has to go through the funnel to get through the back door. Funnel is the only way out. And the interesting thing is, do you see him halfway up the back? That's where he's going to head through that little tunnel. And at the other end of the tunnel is pollen. There it is from the front. You see the front door is locked. Now, these pictures here, we stood out for ages getting these pictures. As the sun came up, the sweat is pouring off us, and there are some mosquitoes that didn't wait for the orchid. They attacked us because our skin is softer, and they could smell, it was only the female that put the bite on us that day. Okay, the insect comes out. Can you see what's on its back? There's pollen. He crawls up. Why is he staying in the center? Because if you look at the whole orchid, the rest of it is shiny, but notice the middle bit is dull. That's because the middle bit is covered with tiny hairs, and he can't go anywhere except up in the way the plant directs him. He must pass the pollen. He has no choice but to do that. And then he, she, both of them will fly away to another plant, and they've got a pile of pollen on their back. Now, do you know something? When you look at these orchids, I watched for the next 2 hours. The insect had gone. No insect was going to come to this flower now. The door actually remained closed for 2 hours. The insects did not bother this orchid at all. They could not get in. And what's fascinating is the insect, if it needs another fuel, injection of fuel, I believe that's a big problem in England at the moment. You've got a problem with your fuel distribution over there. That's one reason Joseph was preaching at the sermon at the wedding today, because the pastor was stuck a long way away. Okay, this flower remained closed for 2 hours. What's fascinating is that the orchid gives the insect only enough fuel for about 10 to 15 minutes. If it wants more fuel to continue traveling, it has to visit another orchid. And when it does that, you see the door will be open for one last time. And that's when the insect will bring in somebody else's pollen. And do you see at the bottom of the flower there, down near the bottom of the slide, that orchid has been pollinated, and the pollen has actually gone down into that tiny little swelling. And when it swells up, it will become a seed head, and it will then burst, and thousands of tiny seeds will come out. And you know very well, and I know very well, when the orchid, the little seeds just go everywhere. There's millions of these things in Australia. And when they go everywhere, they will hatch. Well, hatch is not the right word. They will germinate and they will grow. And you know very well, an orchid always produces pumpkins. No, that doesn't happen at all. You know very well that whether it's a pumpkin, it turns into a pumpkin. Whether it's an orchid, it turns into an orchid, because you've got plenty of ways you can test what God said. He commanded the earth to bring forth plants, and they do that. He commanded the earth to bring forth plants after their kind, and they do that, and they do it well. And none of this is poisonous. Well, some of the plants have now degenerated to the point of being poisonous. Some of the plants, they were created to have a nasty flavor until they were ripe and ready to be eaten. You've wondered why the seed of green lemons is bitter, and why the skin of green lemons is bitter. It's to stop you eating it before the plant is ready to be pollinated and to actually spread its seeds abroad. How long have you got to get fertilization right? Can I encourage you to realize that when you look at even orchid fertilization, not only is it a brilliant example of insects that you think of as nasty, insects that you ask about, why did God make mosquitoes? No, it was not to get back at women because they sinned in the beginning. It was not to get back at men because they listened to their wife instead of listening to God. It was because they all did very good. But here's a key point. How long have you got to get fertilization right? If you don't get it right in the beginning, you never get it right. You only have one generation to make it work. If you don't have everything, you don't have anything. There's the evolutionist chief fallacy. Now, just a few more to finish this off and get you thinking. What did this good creature eat? T-Rex with its sharp teeth? It would have been a certified cabbage killer. Think it through. You see that T-Rex's teeth are not designed to kill things. I mean, the man who's found the most T-Rex on the planet, he actually certified that they are not designed to kill things. They're short-sighted, they can't run very fast to chase you, and their teeth all come out if they had a live animal in its mouth. You see, here's the issue. God made the world good, we ruined it. You want to know what's wrong with the planet? Then look in a mirror and don't blame God. Death entered the planet. The world changed from good to bad. The world is not the same. The world that David Attenborough once explained, he looks at Genesis 1 and says, why did God make nasty things? He should have read Genesis 3, where we sinned, and the real problem is that David Attenborough's a sinner who needs to repent. And then he'll understand that we blew it, not God. The world changed from good to bad to worse this day. And here's one issue that you really need to come to grips with. Yesterday I was doing Vision Radio, and one of the people rang in and said, should we be eating meat? Because God made us all to be vegetarian. I mean, look at your teeth. Are they carnivorous teeth? Wow, look at the big fangs you've got. No, you're not designed to be a carnivore killer. Hang on, excuse me, my dog has just rushed in. I hope he doesn't make too much noise. He looks like a carnivore killer. There's the rule God gave to Noah. After Noah's flood, God gave us permission to kill and eat animals, birds and fish. And he warned us to not eat blood. In fact, here's our final question. When you have a look at what we are allowed to eat, can I encourage you? Pork, beef, insects, cabbage, wheat, black pudding? Which of those was Noah not allowed to eat? And the only answer is the last one. I know people say, well, the Jews don't eat pork, so we shouldn't eat pork. Well, Noah was allowed to eat pork. Noah was allowed to eat every creature that moved. Beef, insects, nothing wrong with John the Baptist diet. You know, crush up all those insects, mix them with honey. Actually, it doesn't taste too bad. Cabbage, wheat, but don't eat the blood. That upsets a lot of my Scottish relatives and my German friends, but that's God's rule. And the fact is, it's the only rule of eating that was passed on into the New Testament. We're going to switch back out of this, and then I'm going to deal with my dog. So I'm going to disappear for a moment. He's here and he wants to play. Only a puppy. So I'll turn that off, Sam. You can put it all the way back to the screen. I'll just excuse myself a moment.
No worries, John. I thought that was very interesting. I never thought of orchids as having such an intimate and eloquent design to them. How they pollinate. I thought it was just sort of bug flies in, then bug flies out, sort of like a rose or a daffodil or something like that, But it's so eloquent to see just how it closes and forces the bug to go past the pollen in order to pollinate. That just does not come from just random chance. That is obviously planned and it's screaming of design. One question for you, Diane. What about plants like the Venus flytrap? How do we explain that from a biblical perspective?
That is interesting. Carnivorous plants like the pitcher plant and things like that. People are still investigating that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just because we don't know all the answers doesn't mean there aren't any. If you don't know the answer to something, the scientific approach is to do some more research and find out. But it's the Venus flytrap just responds to anything falling on their leaves and actually triggering the little hairs on them. And if they trigger 2 of them in quick succession, it does close. Now, if you think about in the good world, there would have been plants shedding their sort of debris and things like that. So maybe they were designed to just sort of clean up the leaf litter and fallen fruit and things like that. And the other thing about pitcher plants, some varieties of pitcher plants they've found will attract small animals like little possums and little squirrel-like things, and who actually use them as toilets. They actually deposit their droppings into them. So it's quite possible that these were originally designed to sort of help clean up the environment. But there's ongoing research into that, and we will keep watching it.
Fantastic.
I've got a few clues here from watching my orchids, and one is that when you actually have insects, remember how we said the insect is picked up and thrown in? It can't do that to bees. The bees are too big. In fact, with many orchids, there's a lock and key mechanism. And in a fallen world, we have to remember even insects are fallen. So there's what I call bully bees, right? And bully insects that are strong enough to force their way in, right? And what's interesting is the getting out door is too small. So they now can't go out the front way and they can't go out the back way. They're stuck. And at the bottom, there's nectar. Now, as Diane will tell you, nectar and things like that have plenty of enzymes in them, right? They're healthy for some of these reasons, right? But if the insects can't get out, there's only so much nectar you can actually enjoy. After that, you drown in it. The plant keeps making it, right? And what you'll find is you can open the orchid, you can open these flowers, and here's the insect now dead, floating in it and beginning to dissolve. Now, if the plant could not get other food, then that is one way that it could supply particularly nitrogen to itself. The other clue is I live out in the countryside. We had a very swampy section, which is now a beautiful manicured dam and things like that after 40 years of living here. But the whole of the back section was covered in sticky dew plants, you know, the ones that have little leaves, and like the Venus flytrap, they have hairs on, but the hairs exude tiny little droplets of sticky dew, and the insect gets trapped, and then the leaf rolls up. Okay, now the one thing we've observed, because I tested it myself, these plants do not catch insects if you give them enough nitrogen, right? So when you have a look at the sticky dew plant, if you shift it to a rich soil, it stops being an insect catcher, right? So it has obviously several ways of getting nitrogen, And as Diane said, it may very well be that little fruits, all those sort of things provided an extra food source when you have creatures that live in, well, the sticky dew plant is famous for living in swampy, boggy areas where nitrogen will not get into the water. So there's 2 clues as to how, plants that digest insects can actually develop. By the way, I'll sneak in a commercial, Sam. The one we did for the conference in the UK was filmed, and they'll find it very useful. Worms and germs and the real history of disease. So Diane and I spent a lot of time preparing that. I presented it, and you'll find that a very, very helpful one. Again, available on our streaming on our MP4. So if you want to put that ad up again, and again, you'll find on the websites, you'll actually find Q&A and all the links to fact file, etc. And we must have quite a heap of articles on snakes and poisons and things like that. So have a look. You'll find those very helpful. And don't forget to jump on and put your questions on for the general question time coming up.
Yes, exactly. One thing I was going to add before we sort of moved on to the Q&A section. A number of years ago, I was on a walk with my parents and some relatives of ours, and we came across these weird pods in the brush, or just off the side of the footpath. And if you touch them, they'd burst, and all these seeds would come out and spread everywhere. I thought, that's fantastic. You just brush them, just a little brush, and they just burst. They just pop open, and it spreads all the seeds everywhere. And I remember looking at my dad, and we all sort of, and my mum was there as well. And I remember we all said, "Oh, what a brilliant example of design." And then the relatives who we were with, who had their small children, came up either behind or in front of us, and they sort of made, "Oh, look at this, kids! Yeah, what a brilliant evidence of evolution." And we were sort of looking at ourselves, going, "How? How do you explain a mechanism like that through evolution? I mean, that it's inherently complex, and just it's down to a fine art of the fact that it just, you just brush past it either with your leg, or an animal goes past it, it bursts open, and the seeds fall on the animal or on the ground, and it carries it with them, and they will germinate elsewhere, and so as the plant will spread. It's a fantastic example.
I've grown those, Sam, deliberately to photograph them. We call them pop plants when we were kids, because you can hear the noise audibly, pop, right? And away they go. And so I set them up, and I measured how far the seeds will travel. Right now, these are almost microscopic. You'll remember the tiny, tiny, tiny seeds, and they travel 6, 7, 8, even 9 meters. I've measured them. Now, anybody who is any sort of physics at all or mathematics, sit down and do the calculations on what it takes to hurl a tiny little, very light seed 9 meters. It's not like hurling a volley ball or hurling a shot put that's got a lot of mass to it, and so the resistance of the air is not a problem. But with the tiny seeds that weigh almost nothing, the amount of energy involved in throwing that out is unbelievable. So I did what you probably didn't do. I contacted watch spring makers, right, and said, what would you need to do this in a watch spring situation? And the watchmaker's mouth just went, that's a spring. We can't make a spring like that, right? This is a zillion times better than any spring that we've been able to actually make. And it's an organic spring, and it really is almost like a hydraulic. It just bursts out. And that they actually do spread the flower up to 9 meters away into new soil, right, where the plant has not used up new soil. In fact, sometimes they are called migration plants because they spread over the country real fast. So yes, you've got to watch that. But it is a brilliant example of design, but it's also a good example of how the kids in today's generation are taught to not think. Evolution is the only explanation, no matter what the evidence is. So that's why you people out there want to pray for Sam, pray for Joseph, pray for the ministry and get behind it with your prayers and your finances. That's what we need.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
there are lots of wonderful examples of that sort of forward. These things only work by forward planning. And maybe we could do a program on that of design in plants where it has to be forward planning. Now, no one is ever going to claim that a plant has a brain that can think, well, how do I design, a seed that flies through the air? Yet people have looked at some seeds and tried to design something that is aerodynamically the same, and they need a supercomputer to do it. So maybe that's something we could do, because there are some brilliant examples that would really inspire people.
Yeah, exactly. George has messaged in the chat. He said, I could calculate that, John, if you tell me the seed mass and velocity at ejection. As he's an engineer by trade, that would be very interesting. I think that could possibly be something to collaborate on. I think trying to
Certainly
sort of
good.
see.
Yeah.
We'll be in touch, George.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
We'll definitely be in
I
touch.
think that would be a good program for us to do on design in plants.
Yes, that would be brilliant.
And how things just don't work unless you've got forward planning. It can't happen by chance.
Exactly. And my dad and also Esther Huddleston has reminded us in the chat that the pod we're on about is from a Himalayan balsam. For those who are interested, you can Google Himalayan
balsam.
Thank you, Diane. There we go. But right, okay, let's have a look and see if I wind back in the chat. Let's see if we've got some questions. Great to see you all. Welcome, Patrick. Hello, Mac and Jerome and Jim. Great to see you all. And Bill. Let's have a look. See. Just whilst we're tell you what, whilst I'm having a look for some questions, John, why don't you give us a little bit of a spiel on walking with Jesus through Genesis?
Okay, very good. We've had increased interest in this one lately, partly because of the broadcast we're doing now, partly because in Australia, ministry is allowed to open up again, just a little in our state. I'm in Queensland. Diane's locked up and locked down in Canberra, so nothing much is happening down there. Victorian is almost like a prison, but up here in Queensland, we have a little bit of liberty. So what we've got is increasing ministry, which is great, and radio programs. And one of the things we've been doing is reminding people they need to start from the beginning with who Jesus is. He is the creator. So if you want a great Bible study, then we take a verse from Genesis and a verse from the New Testament. We follow it all through the Bible. This is volume 1, volume 2, 3, and 4 are in the planning stage, but you'll find this a great daily Bible study for 1 month, walking with Jesus through Genesis, because Genesis begins, in the beginning, God created, and John's Gospel begins, in the beginning was the Word, and then the New Testament is emphatic, all things were made by Jesus. And as we love to remind people, John's Gospel particularly and the Apostle Paul keep jumping backwards and forth between the Jesus who would have been the creator and the New Testament Gospel. So Paul says, for God who commanded the light to shine, day one, has shone in our hearts, Jesus, the light of the glory of God through the face of Jesus Christ. There is no denying the first day of the week was the day the Lord has made. That's the day you can rejoice in, because that's the day Jesus rose from the dead. So the time is not just a simple consequence of Georgian calendars or anything like that. It's part of God's great eternal salvation plan, not from Genesis chapter 12, like many of the theology colleges want to make. It's from right from the very beginning, even before sin came in and mosquitoes were a problem. Okay, so you can get that, put the website up. They know where to get that from the shop, and all over the planet they can get that too.
There we go. And I'll just bring that up in a close-up. There we go. We've got a lovely picture that was taken by myself in a sort of like a jungle Garden of Eden setting. There we go. Nice little close-up for you. So those who want to take a note of the title, you can find that on our website, available in the US, Australia, the UK. It's a great resource, and it's very interactive as well. You can download an app on your smartphone, scan a page, and John will give you a nice little video going in a bit deeper into the topics discussed in that chapter. So altogether, a really, really great read. Right, we've got a question here from Shogiwa. I'll put that up on the stream. There we go. Question. A few years ago, scientists changed the half-life value of one of the long-range radiometric isotopes. Do you remember which one it was?
Basically, I can take you back a bit further. You find the thing that really changed was the value of the Planck's constant, right? That changes everything, because that changes the value of the speed of light, and that changes the radioactive rate away it goes, right? And so basically, instead of just changing one, they really needed to change all of them. Now, when I was at university, we used uranium's half-life as 4.6 million years, right? And then if you honestly seek to, use your Planck's constant, speed of light, and its implications for radioactivity, they should have changed every one of them. But the one you mentioned, Diane, do you remember exactly which one they officially changed?
No, I can't actually. I'd have to look it up. But yes, the great folly in radiometric dating is that everyone assumes that the rate of radioactive breakdown has always been the same, but we can't even measure it accurately, really. So it just undermines the whole basis of radiometric dating, the assumption that it's always been the same. Well, we don't know that, and from this very example, we aren't even sure that we can measure it accurately.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Yeah. We have a question here from Tony Oldnow. It's a bit garbled, but I'll see if I can decipher it. Are there around about 70,000 plants that Sovereign Supreme Mighty Elohim, or God in Hebrew, currently, or is this a current or of accurate figure above? Thank you. So I'm guessing the question is this an accurate figure of around about 70,000 different types of plants in the world today?
Okay, I'll make a comment on classification first. I might want to follow it up. One of the absolutely frustrating things is that there's an absolute acknowledgement, even in science literature, particularly the magazine Nature, that the first classification scheme in history is the one recorded in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, where God told Adam to name the animals, right? That is the first ever listing in history, right? So remember, all of this is a job that God gave us, and we've been doing it ever since. Now, we have no idea if Adam called that little balsam plant the Himalayan balsam plant. I suspect it's actually a British name, because the Himalayas and that, they've changed names as mountains. The balsam plant's certainly a European name, so I'm not going to blame Adam for that one. But here's the frustrating thing. I was at university doing geology, particularly paleontology, and we had to find a fossil and identify it, and then look up all the literature, etc. I handed in my thesis, right, and I was doing an ammonite shell, right? And the trouble was, when I handed it in, my lecturer, my thesis supervisor, he just said, John, this ammonite was changed last week. The name was new PhD. I said, well, how am I supposed to know there's a new PhD that's changed the classification? And he said, well, you're supposed to find this out. I said, yeah, last week. I can't do that. This information was then not in, the electronic mode. We couldn't just Google for a new name. And I've been frustrated by the number of changes, swaps, and in fact, there are people who are splitters, people who are lumpers. In the classification system, you'll find even the dinosaurs, the number of dinosaurs dropped by half. A few years ago, the Encyclopedia of Dinosaurs got skinnier. Then a year later, there was a reaction and they took some back. Not as many as there used to be. And now there's more dinosaurs, but less dinosaurs. And in fact, Diane, this goes on all the time, doesn't it? So saying, are there 70,000 plants is absolutely arbitrary. We do not know. There's just tons and tons and tons. I grow lots of them. We grow lots of them at Jurassic Ark. Diane, what have you got to say on classification?
Yes, it's an ongoing dilemma, and certainly the debate between who are called the lumpers and the splitters. Now, the lumpers are people who want to put things that are classified as different species together, call them under a single name. The splitters are people who say, well, this one is sort of slightly different color or slightly different to that one, and they grow in different places and they don't breed, therefore they must be different, so we'll classify them in a different way. And then sometimes that they get foiled because some human being moves one of those plants and they do find that they do breed, and so they have to reclassify them. And, so it's an unknown quantity, really, just depending on what criteria you are using. Now, the usual definition for a species is a group of organisms that will breed amongst themselves, but not with other things. But then we sometimes find that in the meantime, the plants, and this happens with animals as well, they will get on and breed with one another in spite of the fact that they've been given different names by people. So ultimately, we don't know, because there's just been so much spreading and regrouping ever since things were created. But we were given we were given the ability and to name things, and also it's something that God wanted us to do. So it's quite in order to name things. We just have to be a bit humble about some of the names that we give, particularly if you name something after yourself. That's a bit disappointing.
One other factor that I'll throw in here, Diane, relates to my fossil example, because the interesting thing about fossils, I mean, the professor would say over 90% of all fossil species are extinct. Now, since the animals are dead anyway, you already fail one criteria of being able to recognize a new species. Species are classified on the basis of being able to interbreed, right? Breed together and you're the one species is the usual definition. Have two different species, your horse and your donkey sort of will breed together but produce non-fertile offspring. So what you find is you're starting to say, okay, is that a different species or is it just an aberration? But when they come to be dead, you can't classify them at all. So you really should have the number of plants that are alive and that number of species, then the number of fossil species, how different are they actually, right? And the answer is we just don't know, because you can't breed them. But you can recognize some that are absolutely identical, so that my young granddaughter bought a nice echinoderm to me the other, you know, the sea urchin side of thing that you find on the beaches here in Australia. And I have a fossil one of those, and it looks for all purposes the same. Reason it's easy to tell, she had only a dead one and I've got lots of dead ones out of the rocks, and they are so identical, and that's the only way you can judge them, when the creatures are dead. But the real definition is living, and living things, well, I'll be honest, when they brought plants to Australia, one of the things, and I know this might upset a few people, plants seem to have the ability to detect what their environment is and to produce the varieties that actually cope with that environment. And then they will change back if they go back to the other country, except for strawberries. Our strawberries hatch at the same time yours do. Right? They've never been able to swap over. So it's quite interesting to see how plants respond to different environments. And some of them do have an inbuilt, uh-oh, it's got hotter, uh-oh, it's got colder. And if they can survive, it's called an adaptation, but it's not an ability to change. It's an ability that's built in and it's already there. They don't actually have an evolutionary change at all. Diane, any more comments on species?
And well, I remember once going on a trip up the river on the Central Coast, and the commentator, who was a real environmentalist, said, oh, we're having a lot of problem with the ducks around here, because the imported ducks are breeding with the native ducks, and they're different species, and it's sort of ruining the purity of the native species. But of course, the ducks didn't know that they'd been classified as different species, and they just got on and did what ducks do. And I think that's happening in a lot of places these days.
Fantastic. Right, so I've got a question from my dad, actually. He said, let me just find the comment. He said, amazing tale about the orchid and its pollination. What type of orchid was it? I missed that bit. I think he just tuned in just before he said what type of orchid it was.
Right, it's called a green hood orchid because that little hood comes over and most of them are green. Some of them are russet with a little red back. You saw me show one of those. And there's quite a few varieties. They are native particularly to southern Australia, but you will find them spreading through the swamps. They live in the long grasses where they're mostly invisible to most human eyes. They're only really, really tiny. You saw the size of them compared to a mosquito, so they're not very big at all. But look up green hood orchid. Australia or South Australia is one of the commonest places you can see them, but they will be found all the way through Eastern Australia, particularly in the swampy type areas.
And that's fantastic. And also he followed it up with a longer question. I saw this in the news this week. 2 new dinosaurs were found this week on a beach in the Isle of Wight, described as the first specimen, Ceratopsucops inferred. I can't speak Latin. Labeled a horned crocodile-faced hell heron. Is this exciting?
Diane, what do you think? How excited did you get?
Well, dinosaurs have been found on the Isle of Wight before, so it's not something that's dreadfully new. Don't you love their descriptions? Crocodile-faced horn, they always look for something bad to say about it. If it's got something sharp sticking out of it, or if it's got sharp teeth, they always assume, oh, it must have been an aggressive predator. Now, the other thing to remember is that when they say they've found a new dinosaur, everyone imagines they dug up this enormous, great big creature. Usually they've only dug up one part of one bone or a few separate bones or a broken jaw or something like this. So just be careful when they start telling you about its temperament on the basis that it might just have a few spikes. We know from other experience that some of these spikes and excrescences were used for thermoregulation or for species identification or as to attract mates because they might have been covered with coloured skin. So just because something might look like it's got a fearsome countenance or a fearsome face doesn't necessarily tell you what its temperament really is. And as John succinctly said, fossils are dead things, so you can't see how they reproduce and you can't see their behaviour either.
Yeah, it's really true. Joseph Hubbard's the man you should ask about, would you be excited? Because I've been with him to the Isle of Wight quite a few times, and he is excited over dinosaur poop. So he would have been really excited by 2 fragments of a new dinosaur. Well, maybe it'll turn out to not be a new dinosaur because some of them, you remember I said the dinosaurs have been reclassified, and you find that one reason was, hey, look how different the young one is from the adult one. You know, like butterflies and their larvae. The change was unbelievable, and it certainly turns out to be true for some of the dinosaurs too. So the little horns the baby ones had totally disappeared in the adults, and they ended up being the same species. So it may not be a new species at all. We'll be interested to see how to follow that one. But gee, I love the name, the fiery crocodile horn-faced. You can read that in the Latin. By the way, Sam, you need to improve your Latin.
I know. I studied Latin at school, and it just went right over my head. We've got a few more things here. We've got a message from our good friend John. He said, typical George. He said, how does a caterpillar become a butterfly? Checkmate, atheists. I think that we can probably comment on that with my little limited knowledge, and say that the process of becoming going from a caterpillar to a butterfly is inherently complex and is very, very special and beautiful at the end. But there's no way that could possibly, this is another topic for another stream, but topics are pouring out of the chat at the minute. Diane, John, do you got any comments on caterpillars?
I'll just make one comment because it deserves a whole program, but often people use butterfly migration as examples of God's design. I caution you sometimes on what animals do in their behavior versus the actual chemical design or things like that. Because think carefully, in a good world where there was no winter and no summer, were they designed to go from the warm world to the cold world or vice versa? The answer is no. They were designed to know where they were and to be able to map where they were and to remember where they were or where they wanted to get back to. So in the good world, the geese did not need to fly. You know, those Canadian geese who mess up all of England, they did not need to fly to warmer zones because the whole place was no winter, no extreme summer. The whole place was very good. So it's not the migration which is the evidence of design, it's the inbuilt GPS they already have, which they can use to fly for 200 kilometers, for 20 meters, or wherever they want to go, and a memory to file it. That's what is the inbuilt situation. The mystery one, of course, is that monarch butterfly that takes 3 generations to actually get back. That one has really got the evolutionist stumped.
Exactly. Diane, have you got any extra comments?
Well, metamorphosis in insects is another classic example of forward planning. You've only got 1 generation to get it right because the butterfly is the reproductive phase of the whole life cycle. So unless you get that right, the butterfly will become extinct within 1 generation if you haven't got that right. So it's a classic example of forward planning. And again, chance random processes are not going to do that. It requires someone who knows the beginning from the end.
Exactly. I think we'll probably dedicate again another program on, you know, how things are so innately constructed that one wrong move and it all comes tumbling down. We'll have one last question. We've got a message from Blake here. He's got a 2-parter message. Put that up on the chat there. And so he starts off saying, thank you, John. I always had an issue with spiders and the complexity of their webs and function to catch flies, etc. What was their purpose prior to the fall? He goes on to say, you just encouraged them to research further and discovered some spiders from 10 different families were eating nectar, sap, honeydew, leaves, pollen, and seeds. That's from the BBC in 2016. I'll put the question back up there for you. John, do you want to make a comment on that?
Okay. Firstly, spiders on LSD do terrible webs, right? They've run the tests, put them on drugs, see what happens, and the same thing happens as humans. They lose all common sense in terms of constructing anything. What they think of as normal is totally abnormal. So there's definitely an intelligence involved in here in setting up to make their web. Secondly, one of the things that I often do, which puzzles people, they ask me, is it going to rain? And I say no. My wife particularly wants to know, is it going to rain, because she doesn't put the washing out if I say it's not going to rain, or if it is going to rain. And then one day she said, well, how do you know? I said, the spiders tell me. And she looked at me strangely. Ever since I was a boy, I've noticed one thing. We have grass spiders that only build their webs in the grass to catch moisture on days when it's not going to rain, right? So on days when it's not going to rain, they'll be there early in the morning and they're all full of moisture, and then they'll come along and they'll eat them. They are actually getting their liquid supplies from the actual web itself. Now, when you think carefully, the creatures that God made were very good, so their webs have other functions that most people never even go looking for. I accidentally uncovered the bit about the spiders getting the moisture, but since then, like the BBC, they will catch pollen, they will catch all sorts of things, and the one thing they don't do is eat insects. You know, the spiders will put up a web and a fly that will get caught to it. If you've ever noticed, they don't go and say, oh, fly pie. They actually suck the fluid out of it, and it's the fluid that they're after, not the actual eating of the insect itself. And so this is a coincidental consequence of actually having a web there in the first place, but it's not what the spider is actually after. They're after the fluids, particularly useful in a dry country like Australia, where they'll deliberately go and take their web and put it away. So they don't waste their web. It's quite an amazing design feature. That's my comment. Diane, any more comment on what the BBC said about looking for honey and things like that?
Yes, they will eat pollen, because pollen is actually quite high in protein, and they need protein to sustain their life. In fact, the spider web itself is actually made out of protein, so they need a diet that has a lot of protein in it. So if they can't get that from pollen, they will get it from insects that happen to run into their webs. And certainly they will eat nectar, and basically they'll eat whatever they can, like most creatures. The actual structure of the web has been investigated, and I've actually got a set of slides on this that it does explain it. You need to actually see it. So maybe that's something that we can do in a follow-up to this program. But basically, scientists have looked at the nanostructure, in other words, the microscopic structure of spider web fibers to see how they work, because they are just so good at capturing and holding water. And they've discovered they have this intricate, really clever nanotechnology design. And they're even trying to use that as a way of capturing water from the atmosphere in places that are dry. So again, when we closely look at things, we see brilliant design and forward planning. We don't see accidental processes.
There is one other factor which most people may not be aware of. When you know how God told the people to spread out and fill the earth, the insects are programmed to do that as well. Why hang around in the one place? We're going to use up all the pollen, use up all the honey. So if you ever see it, it's an amazing thing to see. I've only seen it twice in my life, and that is the migration of the spiders. They hatch out, their nests are up in the trees, right? And when they hatch out, you'll find once they get big enough, they'll wait for a windy day, and then they'll actually fly through the air, right? Attached to a very long thread of, it comes out of their bodies. So they've got a stable point, and the actual big long bit of web acts like almost like an aileron and guides them where they want to go. And then they'll land 100 meters away, and they'll do it all at once. So you can actually see millions of spiders with long, skinny, silvery, it's always in the morning that I've seen it, and the sight is spectacular. Unfortunately, it's always happened when they're not at a camera, but it really is a spectacular thing. I don't know how to predict it to get my camera ready, but it's obviously an example of forward planning again. The spider can balance in the air, and it can attach itself so the wind can't blow it right away, or it won't land in the water. If it does, it can haul itself back. So brilliant example of God's forethought and planning. Exactly.
Amen to that one. Just a quick thought as well, going back to Diane's talk on snakes. I've one sort of example you can look at for a very, very docile, in fact, actually quite friendly snake, similar to what you would see if you were to go back to the Garden of Eden, would be a corn snake. They're very, very friendly. They don't bite. They don't generally hurt humans. They're very docile. I've held many a corn snake in my time. I've never had any problems with them. It tends to be the more sort of angry looking ones that have the temperament, like a rattlesnake or something like that. Is there a reason why like a rattlesnake would have, or something like that would be more territorial than, say, a corn snake?
Diane?
Well, animals do have temperaments, and they vary quite a lot. And we do have to remember that survival of the fittest and natural selection are real processes, and they would have kicked in after the fall, and particularly after Noah's flood, where there was competition for resources. And so animals that were more naturally aggressive would have survived and then passed on that trait. So some animals are just naturally more aggressive, and particularly if they're territorial, just because of the lack of resources and the increased competition. Now, I'm not familiar with corn snakes. We don't have them here, but presumably they're docile if they are in an environment where they are well fed. Now, snakes don't need a lot of food. I know that there is a whole sort of subculture of people who keep snakes. And I remember there was a reptile expert at the university where I used to work. and he complained about children wanting furry animals as pets. And he said, I've given my kids some lovely snakes. and I can remember a couple of times his children did come into the university during the university holidays when the students weren't there. And they would have snakes in their back pocket and carry them around. So a lot of snakes are not aggressive, because they've found themselves in a niche where they're well fed and they're comfortable, and so that they won't attack humans or other creatures around them. But there are some snakes that live out in the wilds of the desert, semi-desert or arid places. Being aggressive and being a bully has led to success, and that's survival of the fittest, a real process, but it's part of that degeneration of the world. It's not something that is going to make the snake have the features that it has. It's just part of that general degeneration of the world, which affected animals as well as people.
There's one comment I'll throw in before we sort of finish off. A friend of mine, a teacher, was mad keen on snakes, right? And he would take a snake to school to show the kids, and he would invite me sometimes to come in and talk about creation. He was a Christian guy, but one day it backfired. He had a lovely brown coloured python, about 4 or 5 meters long, and he decided to take it in to show the kids. And what was interesting, of course, is he brought it in and he draped it over his neck. This is quite common in Australian snake parks. It's a real show-off thing. Get your photograph taken with a monstrous python wrapped around your shoulders. And anyway, when he put it in, the kids go, oh, and one girl wasn't too keen on this. You know, she was frightened. Animals, snakes can sense fear. Now, imagine the following. The snake is draped around a shoulder, and all of a sudden, fear comes into the room, scream, laughter. The kids do both at the same time. The snake whips up, wraps itself around the neck. And of course, the kids think this part of a show. So they're all laughing their heads off while the teacher's starting to go blue and try to get this thing off. The snake was frightened, right? So it reacted with what you and I would call a death challenge. And of course, it took ages before it could actually get this off. Fortunately, less than 3 minutes, or we would have been chopping it off. So you find that this is a factor that builds in fear from humans. So that I was in a house where a corn snake got loose, and there were certain women in the house who weren't too keen on that snake being out, even though the boy thought it was wonderful, right? So you've got all the behavioral factors in a sinful, fallen world, and it even affects animals, dogs, snakes, etc.
Fantastic. And just one last comment from George. Why don't you have a super chat? So super chat is the fancy new thing on YouTube where you can highlight messages if you make a donation. We don't have that feature available to us yet because we don't have enough subscribers. So if you want us to have super chat, you want to get your message on screen guaranteed, then feel free to get subscribed, get sharing, get other people to subscribe, bump our numbers up, so then we can have these nice, lovely super chats. I believe that's how it works. But we'll end it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Doki. Doki, good to see you. Good to see Redefined Living and George Blake, everyone, Jim, Daniel Spencer, great to see you. And who else has been in here? Esther, good to see you. Shogiwa. Yeah, fantastic. It was great to see all you guys in the chat. We'll be back next week as usual. So it's thank you from me. Thank you from John. Thank you from Diane. Any closing comments?
You won't see me next week. I've got a busload of people from Rockhampton at Jurassic Ark. So you probably see Joe and Diane. So, and you particularly, Sam.
Yeah. Possibly me. We'll see how the mood takes us. But yes, thank you so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.